Hey, what's up, everybody? My name is Jeremy Schumacher. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I'm the Jer, Wellness with Jer. Thanks for stopping by and checking out the channel. Today, we're back with another song review. This is a song someone sent to me. It's about religious trauma. The song is called Guilt, parentheses, Interlude, from a band called Waterparks. I don't know a lot about Waterparks. They seem to not be for my generation. A younger person sent this to me, but I do like the topic of the song. So we'll dive in. What little bit I listened to of Waterparks from not this song is a different vibe than this. So just a heads up. This does seem to be that word interlude is carried a lot of weight, but I like the topic and I like having a song that gives me a reason to jump off and talk about this topic some more. So let's check it out.
Religious guilt is the name placed on learned trauma through the teachings of the church. From an early age, these institutions instill ideas in you that your interests, your natural feelings, and even who you are as a person are inherently wrong, and that at the end of your life, you will face punishment for who you are and the feelings you were born with. These organizations lay out rules and guidelines to shame and, in turn, control you. These unreasonable principles are carved into you as early as possible and as deeply as they can be. Because the earlier they program you, the harder it is to reset in the future. Your relationships, self-esteem, and mental well-being are fractured in ways that you may not even recognize until the source is confronted and unlearned. This shame starts to control you. Hate, violence, and fear will keep you right where they always wanted you. Don't overcorrect. Don't chase a replacement. Don't fill the hole with justice. Find peace. Find yourself. Everybody is a god once you make it out of the pool.
Okay. Not a very long song. Not a lot. I don't know all the water parks lore. There was a 45-minute video on YouTube saying something about water parks lore, and I just didn't make myself watch it all. Because I didn't like any other songs I listened to. But it seems like religious trauma is the theme of at least a couple of their other songs, and what this song had to say about it is actually pretty good. There's some nitpicky things I'll talk about, and again, not like bad song or bad information, just like when you're putting things into art or you're making a song about something, you might not be able to go fully in depth about things. I do some long reviews of songs and still get some nitpicky comments. And it's like, right, I don't know, in a 30-minute YouTube video, I'm not always citing sources or talking about what has passed peer review. So let's go over some of these lyrics here. So first, just religious guilt is the name placed on learned trauma through the teachings of the church. Sort of. I mean, like guilt is not necessarily just a religious feeling, but religion uses guilt as a strong motivator. Um, Learned trauma is like just the nitpicky thing I'll say, in that trauma is the brain's response to uh, unresolved feelings of not being safe. So, thinking of like a traumatic event, the trauma is what happens after, and so the trauma is the thing that really sticks with us. So, like indoctrination is could be a learned trauma, I suppose. It's just that's weird wording. It makes sense in the frequency and tempo of the song. One of the things the song talks about is institutions instill ideas in you from an early age, from as early as they can get you, and so that's why indoctrination is such a problem before your brain's fully developed and before you have any sort of critical thinking skills. Religion is wanting to do these things. It's why the religious right has been so outspoken about indoctrination that happens in public school. It isn't that they're opposed to indoctrination, they're opposed to indoctrination that isn't coming from them. They want to be able to indoctrinate. So they've created this boogeyman that's purely about projection. Um, they're not even worried about being called hypocrites anymore because they don't care. They have Donald Trump as their nominee. Like they don't care about the hypocrisy. That's not what they want. They just want the in-group out-group dynamic. And so they don't care that they're indoctrinating. They don't care that their indoctrination by religious leaders is leading to child abuse at horrific numbers, repeatedly over and over again from the systemic abuse. Percentage wise, the number one profession most likely to abuse children is religious leaders. So, like, indoctrination from religious groups is specifically harmful to people. But again, like the religious right doesn't care about that. They don't, it's not about hypocrisy. It's about creating that in group, out group dynamic. So they want school choice. They want things that are getting government funding so that they can get to kids early on. The 10 Commandments in public school isn't about necessarily even spreading Christianity. It's about creating this norm where that religious institutions have access to kids because they want to get people as children. The other big time that church recruitment goes up is in times of crises. So they want people who are going through a major shift in life, or they want natural disasters or things where people are shifting, where people are feeling not like well supported, or they are not thriving. That's when religious institutions can come in and really start indoctrinating people as well, because there's a lot of plasticity in the brain at those times. So undeveloped brains, indoctrination, religious indoctrination comes with guilt, which is what the song's about, right? So like things that are natural, sexuality, um, gender fluidity, the church is really big against those things. The church wants to control something like sexuality because it is a natural thing and it makes you feel good. Sex feels good for most people. We're wired for it to feel good. And so it's one of those things where like having freedom around it is makes you difficult to control. So the church has always been about controlling that. So the song says your natural feelings, who you are as a person, are inherently wrong. At the end of your life, you'll face punishment for who you are and the feelings you were born with. So again, like getting into personal ideas of justice, personal ideas of sexuality, personal ideas of gender. These are the things that the church is trying to control because the church wants you to be in group, right? Look a certain way, act a certain way, and things that are about liberty, freedom, equality aren't that. That's not what the church is interested in. The church is just interested in group, out group dynamics, so that control comes with the organized portion of organized religion. The organization is there is us and there is them. And you don't want to be a them, you want to be an us. Us go to heaven. The in group, we go to heaven. The out group, those heretics, those unbelievers, the fallen, they go to hell. And like, what's hell? Well, in scripture, I was raised conservative Christian. So the way that I was raised was hell is, Dante's Inferno hell. It's burning fire, eternal punishment, tortured forever, deviled with hooves and a forked tail. The Bible actually says very little about hell. It seems to just sort of be the grave for most of it, but then occasionally it's a lake of sulfur. So there's some fire imagery there, but it doesn't say a lot. A lot of the what modern Christianity and evangelicals will talk about with hell is mostly informed by Dante's Inferno and Paradise Lost, and very little of it is scriptural. But again, like hell trauma is a real thing. It's part of the reason that I talk about in my personal history why I stayed in the church for so long. Was 4-year-old Jeremy was very imaginative, and so this idea that you could be punished for something you did for all of eternity was scary. That was enough to keep me identifying as Christian long after there wasn't anything to identify Christian with. Like none of my beliefs or personal ethics were really aligned. Be kind to people, love is important, help marginalized communities, give to the poor. Like those were my ethics, and that's in some of Jesus' parables, but that wasn't Christianity writ large at that point. Certainly not since Donald Trump has come into the picture. So yeah, what the song has to say about religious guilt and trauma at that point is that like it's a taught thing, it's a learned thing, it's driven by fear. That's very accurate. One of the things I say in therapy a lot is that fear is a very powerful motivator. It's just a poor decision maker. We know, studying the brain right back here at our brainstem, where the spinal cord meets the brain, like that's where we do trauma responses: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So that idea of like, oh no, there's a predator, let's run away. Those fear responses, those instinctual kind of animal brain stuff is all right at the brainstem. And so fear is right there next to our trauma responses. Run away, that flight response, run away from something. So like that's what the church tries to do. It creates this fear, hell, eternal punishment, and then offers that salvation. And to sell salvation, there does need to be that threat. And so that's what organized religion does. Back to the lyrics. Its organizations lay out rules and guidelines to shame and in turn control you. Its unreasonable principles are carved into you as early as possible, as deeply as they can be, because the earlier they program you, the harder it is to reset in the future. Relationships, self-esteem, and mental well-being are fractured in ways you may not even recognize until the source is confronted and unlearned. Shame serves you in no ways. Hate, violence, and fear will keep you right where they always wanted you. Yeah, that is all spot on. That is the control of organized religion. Stephen Hassan writes about cult mind control tactics, and he has the BITE model, which is behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotion control. And when we look at cults, all of those things are very apparent. When we look at mainstream evangelical fundamentalism, when we look at what the modern Christianity looks like, all of those things are there: behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotion control. You should feel badly about these things. You should think this way on these topics. You should dress a certain way. Your spouse should act a certain way. So there are all these behavior controls on like the way you should act and how we should judge people, how we should excommunicate people when they step out. There's information control that I was raised fundamentalist. So young earth creationism, Noah's Ark was a real thing. And that we found it, and that evolution was the lie, that was Satan's tricks. So like information control is our source of information, the Bible, written for a very small percentage of people throughout history, ignoring most of history, ignoring science. That's your only source of information. Everything else could be a trick from our bad guy, the guy who stood for liberty earlier in the story, and knowledge. So again, like alienating yourself from your natural feelings, what your body is telling you, and then alienating yourself from other sources of information. Thought control, again, plays off of that information control. You should feel these things. The satanic panic, the gay panic in the 80s, the satanic panic in the 90s. Now to like transphobia, it's a thing I've talked about in other places. Like these moral outrages, these moral panics are contrived, and again, to create that in-group, out-group. They want to alienate a certain group of people. It all comes from segregation. If you study the religious right movement, Behind the Bastards is a podcast that I listen to. They have a couple episodes on like Jerry Falwell on how conservatism won, Ronald Reagan, and getting in with the religious right. A lot of this stuff comes out of Brown v. Board of Education, which is when segregation ended in the United States. It didn't end when it was made illegal. And the religious right was really mad about it because they were racists. And so they wanted to bring segregation back, which is like where private school comes from, where church choice, why the religious right is so big on the choice school movement, because they want to segregate. Again, their segregation isn't necessarily based on race, although like people like Jerry Falwell Sr. were racist, and a lot of people who do like the religious homeschool. I'm trying to blank on the name, but like Mike Johnson, who's Speaker of the House, he's part of the NAR, the New Apostolic Reform. They're the people who kind of teach that like Christians were told in the Bible to take control of the earth, which is like a really small section in Genesis, and then they ignore everything else that's in the Bible unless it serves them. But so these people who are like, you should do control, that comes out of a lot of homeschool curriculum created by the religious right, and that NAR movement is deeply seated in the eugenicist movement from like the 1920s. So like if we go back even further, it gets even more racist. So that's not great. But even taking the race component out of it, like again, this is all in-group, out-group dynamics. And like the fact that white dudes from the 1920s, white dudes from the 1950s were in fact racist isn't a huge shock. And so that's just baked into the in-group, out-group dynamics that they're trying to create, which is why someone like Donald Trump could come in and sort of mirror a lot of that, and why it's so yucky and gross. Shame, and it serves you in no way. I talk a lot in therapy about the difference between guilt and shame. Guilt is the sort of idea that you've done something wrong and there's a correction. Shame is just sort of like a cyclical thing that like makes you feel bad. I metaphorically talking about like a dog tucking its tail between its legs. Shame is a pretty unhelpful thing. It really like is debilitating. It makes you not take action. Whereas guilt is much more of a corrective thing. It's a corrective action. And like, again, some of that is probably flavored by my religious upbringing and talking about that being different things. But like religion really tries to use shame. I was raised Lutheran. So like this idea of like guilt, Catholic guilt is a normal kind of like joke that people who grew up that way talk about. Lutheran guilt's the same way. Like that guilt is this motivating factor, but that's not really guilt. That's shame, to really keep you from doing anything about like social justice or caring about your fellow humans. Again, like a bunch of what Jesus in the New Testament talked about was like taking care of the poor people. People like to be like, he was socialist. Like he probably never actually existed. He's a mythical figure, not a real person. But like a lot of what is in that New Testament before Paul rewrites a lot of it, that's out of order. Paul probably wrote it first. But like, again, there are different authors to these different letters, and they're talking about social things for their time. And so some of the New Testament little bits of the parables and stuff are about taking care of people or bringing people in. Paul was a real historical figure that we know about, and we have a lot of his firsthand writings, and he was trying to bring people into the church. That even early evangelical movement was about like feeding the poor, bringing people in. It was to get them in group. It wasn't just like altruistic. It was trying to set up like Christian communes and stuff like that. But those ideas were there. That's not really what modern Christianity is raising people on. It's a lot more fear-based. It's a lot more of these cultural issues, these moral panics, in-group, out-group dynamics. And again, so I don't know that I finished my thought before. So why was it about race? Well, because it was started by racists. Um, but like that in-group, out-group dynamic, there needs to be this driving force. And so that went from race to then the gay panic in the 80s, because a lot of people learned that like racism wasn't cool, and that when we ended segregation, white people interacted with people of different color a lot, and we're like, oh, why was this a thing? These are just regular people. They have hopes and dreams just like us. They can learn just like us. They're humans. We're the same. Our pigmentation is different. That's literally it. And so as segregation ended, lots more people learned that like racism as an in-group, out-group driving force wasn't such a scary thing. And if you don't have a scary thing, then you can't sell salvation. And so the religious right has changed what their panics are was race, and then it was the gay panic as AIDS epidemic was happening. And again, that was a policy choice, not a thing. Like the AIDS epidemic could have been responded to a lot better, and it was demonized, and the religious right had a big hand in not helping that out, not helping out people in need. And again, like so, going against kind of what Christianity maybe says it stands for, and when it mixes with politics, it doesn't do that. It isn't ever about helping people. Um, and then people learned that gay people aren't actually dangerous and they can get married and they're not harming anyone, and that was all contrived social moral outrage. And so then it had to shift. And so we've landed on the trans panic because the amount of diversity in the world is better than it used to be. Like the internet has grown, people have more access to different groups. And so when we interact with different groups, when we see other people as humans and we experience that, it's harder for organizations like religion or political movements or whatever to say these are like alien other that that out group is harder to say like they're bad and scary, be afraid of them. So we without that big bad guy, it's hard to sell yourself as the good guy, which is what organized religion wants to do. So it's gone from like racial stuff, which is a big percentage of the population, especially when we consider worldwide that like being white isn't the dominant thing, um, to gay versus straight, and then that was proven to not be scary. And then sort of the satanic panic was a weird quirky thing, and like don't read Harry Potter, and like that turned out to be right, but just because J.K. Rowling's a terrible person. uh and I don't know, I've never read Harry Potter. I grew up on Lord of the Rings, not Harry Potter. um and then so the satanic panic was kind of a quirky weird thing. The satanic panic covered a lot of marginalized communities. It just was poorly organized. Um, and so now trans is even smaller percentage of the population because they keep getting smaller and smaller because they're picking small groups that fewer people will have interacted with and been like, oh, these people are just people. They're not harming anyone. They're not indoctrinating anyone. They're not the bad guys. Religion keeps needing to say there's a bad guy because it's them, right? The call's coming from inside the house. But they need a bad guy to be elsewhere. It's like a bully who is deeply insecure but needs to pick on other people and highlight their insecurities so nobody notices it. Like the church is the one doing the indoctrinating, doing the harmful things, and they don't have a solution to anything. Again, I do this professionally all day, not all day, every day, but regularly working with folks who are survivors of religious trauma, my own upbringing. So yeah, it's pulling on all these threads. There's a lot here, and it's all upsetting. Last couple lyrics: don't overcorrect, don't chase a replacement, don't fill the hole with justice. Find peace, find yourself. Everybody is a god once you make it out of the property. So that's a reference. Their Waterparks had a album called Intellectual Property, and then they were gonna have the sequel, Intellectual Property 2, which is what the song was supposed to be on. Apparently they're canceling it. Again, I don't know what's going on with this band. It's hard to find out. Like it seems like some of the gimmicky stuff they do was used as promotional materials, so I don't actually know. I had never ever heard of them. Apparently they opened for like, I don't know, some of those like emo late 2000s bands. So like they'd been on the Warp Tour and stuff, just genuinely had never heard of them. Again, I don't think I'm the target audience for this. But like yeah, this song has some good stuff. Like don't fill the whole justice. Like I do think fundamentalism and dogmatic religion really keeps people from doing anything different. We talk about spiritual bypassing a lot, we being religious trauma therapists. We talk about religious spiritual bypassing, which is like having something that feels uncomfortable and rather than like doing anything with it. So like being like there's injustice in the world rather than seeking justice. Spiritual bypassing is like it'll be better when heaven is here. Like it'll all be good. Let go and let God. God works in mysterious ways. Those are all examples of spiritual bypassing in which we're not doing any work. So like anger as a signifier for some injustice never being addressed might be ignored if you just say God works in mysterious ways rather than saying, whatever the injustice was or pursuing any sort of corrective action. So yeah, I mean the song is pretty good on what organized religion is doing, how organized religion is harmful to people. Um, it uses some weird wording, but like Marlene Winnell, I think first coined the term as religious trauma syndrome. We have since dropped the syndrome of it. It's just religious trauma. People are studying complex PTSD, and like complex PTSD as a concept is still not in the DSM. It's not diagnosable. So like religious trauma is a subset of that. So it's a thing that's being studied. It's a thing that a lot of academics and a lot of professionals, like practitioners, like therapists, and um, I know some death doulas who do religious trauma work and are outspoken about toxic theology being harmful for people. And so there's a lot of people who work in mental health spaces and we're working in academia who are aware of this and are trying to get good information out. It's just, especially with psychology, I would say it's like 20 years behind the research. Um, and that's probably an oversimplification, but like there's a delay between when we're culturally aware of things and then we study them and then we can start integrating them. So this is a lot of like religious trauma survivors who are getting the message out with the internet. Information's widely available in a way it wasn't before, and now people can find groups. There's all sorts of deconstruction podcasts for people who are leaving. Like a band like this is doing a song on religious trauma. Also, like the music video has a lot of like religious imagery, obviously the crosses, but like the frog. I don't know what the frog is relevant to for the band, but like the plague of frogs in the Old Testament. So the frogs have some religious imagery. I did a review of a Nick Cave song, and there's some water and also frog imagery on his new album. So like frogs play a role in some religious imagery. So like lots of stuff here. There's some crucifixion stuff. So I don't know if the property is like relevant. I could certainly see a way in which the way the music video that I showed is related to like some cult like stuff. And again, I think there's a difference between growing up on a cult, like on a compound, like you think of Waco, Texas, and Branch Davidians, versus now where we look at like the MAGA movement as a cult, and like online indoctrination looks a lot different than in-person indoctrination, but we find it kind of follows the same path. It's just a different medium. So again, professionals, researchers, practitioners are all up on this stuff and working on it. It's just groups, organized religion, and cults, and things that want to take advantage of people and have dogmatic control over them are constantly updating the way that they do this. Like cults have been in existence for as long as we have written history, like religious cults. And so this way to organize and then take advantage of that organization and create an in-group, out-group, and use that for your advantage somehow to get power or money or both. Religions like the Mormon church has billions of dollars, and like they have a bunch of real estate. They're an enterprise, and so is the Catholic Church. Obviously, Catholic Church is easy one to highlight, like where this goes wrong when there's no accountability and they get too much power, like the Middle Ages and the Dark Ages. Um, so yeah, this is a topic that I'm deeply fascinated by, right? Like I work with this professionally, and I really enjoy doing the work. I love helping people come out of toxic theology and seeing where they can land with some version of healthy spirituality. Um, yeah, I'm always happy to see songs like this. I'm glad that there are people out there making art around these things. I think normalizing these conversations, and we're seeing people leave the church in record numbers. So the nuns, NONES, none, um, people who would answer none when they're asked what religion they're a part of. That's at least a third of the population in the United States, and that's increasing very quickly. It's exponential growth, while church attendance and people who identify as religious is declining steeply. So there's a bunch of work ahead for people like me who do this work, as people are seeing the flaws of organized religion and coming out of dogmatic or high control religion. So great that this message is getting put out. Good information about this, not some of the wellness spaces and some of the like coming out of religion stuff then just propagates and repeats the same sort of cult like behavior of in-group out-group dynamics. So like again, advocating for autonomy, find yourself, find your own peace, like these ideas about individual healing and then deciding what your values and your ethics look like is great, instead of just slapping a different morality or a different ethics on it, but with that same top down or hierarchical approach. So yeah, I like the song. I like the little techno stuff, like I listen to some weird electronica. Dan Deacon's one of my favorite artists. So like I can dig this song and probably will listen to it more, probably sneak it on some playlists, especially my electronica playlists. It's different than Waterparks' other sounds, which are a little like emo-y boy bands. But like I was never even a huge My Chemical Romance and the people they toured with. Like I that more power to you if you are familiar with Waterparks. Waterparks seem like very creative dudes, and like more power to them. I'm not saying their music is trash. I'm acknowledging I'm old and that this music came about after my musical tastes were sort of set. So they're just not my vibe. But I do like this song, and love the messaging around it. So if you're a Waterparks fan and there are other songs that are about religious trauma, it seems like that imagery is present. So drop down in the comments, chat about that. Like, subscribe, all those good YouTubey things help me and help other people find my work. So I appreciate that. If there's other things you want to hear me talk about, pop culture stuff, songs, whatever, drop down in the comments. Let me know. I love to use the pop culture stuff as a way to, as a jumping off point, so I can talk about some mental health concepts. So do all those things. Thanks for stopping by, checking out the channel. Hey, I want to show everybody my shirt. It's the folded hands. You can't see the bottom of it. It has pro wrestling bands on it, like Ultimate Warrior. It's a Young Buck shirt. Who they sort of tongue in cheek. I think they are Christian. I mean, truly they are Christian. But it's a tongue in cheek shirt from when they were the bad guys in pro wrestling, and they would just use the fact that they're Christian AF as an excuse. So this is a shirt that says Christian AF, but it's satire. What's up, Young Bucks? I'm a pro wrestling nerd, so I'll throw that in there. Thanks for stopping by. I'm not going to start a new ramble. Take care of yourself. Take care of somebody else. Peace.